But I would love to hurt him and finish him and put him out.
How was he punching? Was it hurting
like
you?
A son of, he punches like a mule kick. Unbelievable. Excuse my French, please. Oh, my God.
It's time!
You're listening to the Cage Nation TV Prizefight Podcast. Coming to you from the Coastal Cameron Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Are you ready?
Here's your host, the big fella, Albert Cameron.
Let's get it on!
Thank you for joining us for the Prizefight Podcast, the bare-knuckle, pound-for-pound, original Cage Nation TV Prizefight Podcast. Today on the podcast, we're talking about the Ultimate Fighter Season 26 cast was announced last night at UFC Fight Night in Mexico. We're going to be talking about what we like, what we don't like about that. We're going to give you some details. Stipe Miocic calls out boxing heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua, and what can only be described as a tactic pulled out of Conor McGregor's playbook. We're calling it the McGregor effect. We're also going to be taking a look at the back and forth point-counterpoint between Tyron Woodley and Dana White. Who has the moral high ground, folks? It's in the art of war that the one who has the moral high ground is the most likely to win. We're going to be talking about that in a brand new segment called Point and Counterpoint. We got all that, some really big discussions right here on the Prizefight Podcast. Don't go nowhere. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, while we're taking a break, we just want to remind you that right now we are looking for new people to join the Cage Nation TV roster of creators. We're looking for creators who have a fight circuit close to home, who have a sincere passion for combat sports, and would like to help us bring new territories to the forefront of our coverage. For more information, visit www.cagenationtv.com/opportunity/pioneer or send us an email at cagenationtv@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Prizefight Podcast. If you're listening to the Pioneer Program advertisement, you're thinking, man, I could do that, then do it. Get a hold of us today. Let's talk about how we can start getting some representation around your fight circuit, how we can make this happen for you. We'd love to welcome you to the nation, to the Army. We'd love to have you. Last night it was announced that the Ultimate Fighter Season 26 had its cast, and it was announced Eddie Alvarez and Justin Gaethje will be coaching. The season's going to be featuring and building up the women's flyweight division. We'd be remiss not to mention that the Ultimate Fighter was the platform that the women's strawweight division was launched. And if not for that season of the Ultimate Fighter, we wouldn't be talking about people like Joanna Jacek. That's a mouthful. Among the competitors, we got Roxanne Modafferi, Barb Honchak, who is the Invicta FC flyweight champion, and UFC veteran Lauren Murphy. At the end of this tournament, at the end of the season, we will have crowned a women's flyweight champion. Let's talk about what the Ultimate Fighter has really done for us. Over 25 seasons of the Ultimate Fighter, we've had some great things happen. If not for that first season, I don't think MMA would be where it is today. And I mean, I've said that to death. I think one of the most important fights, if not the most important fight in MMA history, is Griffin versus Bonner. That fight was the right fight at the exact right time, exactly when we needed it. And if it were not for that fight, and not for that season, not for that show, I think MMA would be extremely obscure right now, if not completely eradicated by social pressures. It was that season of The Ultimate Fighter that really demonstrated what mixed martial arts was all about to the mainstream public, to the uninitiated. Without that season, we wouldn't have had on display what we as a fan base are all about. It was absolutely incredible. Over the next 25 seasons, the strawweight division was established. Kimbo Slice did exactly what Dana White said he was going to. If he was ever going to be in the UFC, he had to go through the Ultimate Fighter, and he did. Former IFL heavyweight champion Roy Big Country Nelson was introduced to the UFC. I didn't agree with that, but it happened. Matt Hughes and Matt Serra had some great moments. The women's bantamweight division was bolstered by a season of the Ultimate Fighter. Julian Lane, we let him bang, bro. Why did not we let him bang? I mean, we owe a lot to the show, I think, is the point and counterpoint to that. And without the Ultimate Fighter, we'd be hurting right now. Without the Ultimate Fighter, we would be hurting. So let's talk about what I agree with, if my opinion means anything to you. And there's a good chance it doesn't, but that's okay. Let's talk about what I agree with. When building a new division, it's good to utilize a public platform like a television show to make that happen. It's kind of like vlogging. A very archaic form of vlogging. It's emotion. We're building emotional interest. We're trying to build the women's flyweight division. So what better way to say, this is how we're doing it. These are the people involved. These are contenders. Here is their story. Here's why you should care. Roxanne Modafferi competed in the bantamweight season of The Ultimate Fighter when she's naturally a flyweight. So there we go. We already have a champion in the mix in Barb Honchak. UFC veteran Lauren Murphy already done her thing. What I think is really interesting to note, and I'm going to be kind of interested to see how this plays out in the seeding in the bracket, is that Modafferi and Honchak already have a bout. Honchak got the best of it. So it's going to be kind of cool to see how Modafferi gets back. I mean, if she's able to compete against Honchak again. I like that whoever wins and is crowned champion, they had to fight for the title and not just be crowned champion. And it's happened. I mean, when the UFC enveloped the WEC and Strikeforce, they were just crowning champions. Jose Aldo Jr. was crowned UFC featherweight champion after just being brought into the UFC. Ronda Rousey was just crowned UFC women's bantamweight champion, and I think she actually refused to wear the belt until she beat Liz Carmouche in the middle of the octagon, and then she was fine with wearing that. What does it mean if Barb Honchak was just signed by the UFC, being in the Invicta FC the flyweight champion? If she were just signed and then given the belt, like, here you go, this is yours, Barb, it's shiny, polish it, it wouldn't mean anything. It's like whenever the UFC instituted the women's featherweight championship, and De Randami had to fight Holly Holm. Like, if one of those two had just been crowned, it wouldn't mean as much. And now Christiane Cyborg Justino is the featherweight champion. I think I would have been more okay with Cyborg being just handed the title than someone else. But, you know, I like that they have to fight for it. What is the point of a championship if you were just awarded? Like, hey, Bob over there in the corner. Hey, you look about 155 pounds. You're the new lightweight champion of my kitchen. That's exactly what it would be in very simple terms. I also like the way that the UFC has used the Ultimate Fighter to establish the strawweight division, and while I can't count on lightning striking twice, I like the odds that it will. If not for the UFC strawweight season, where we had to build the champion was crowned. If not for that season, we would have never known Carla Esparza. We would have never known Joanna Jacek. I like the way that was put together. I like the way it was assembled. I like the way it was packaged. The UFC had to walk a very thin line when they were introducing the women's divisions. I mean, there was always, I imagine, the temptation of, you know, trying to make it a TNA season, but they didn't. The UFC has always respected the women's fighters, and that's why I've always considered women's MMA to just be MMA. That's what it is. I mean, the gender of the athlete, the gender of the competitor, really has no bearing on how the rules should be contested. That's why whenever Gina Carano took on Julie Kedzie on the first female televised bout, it was kind of gross that they had to fight under 3-minute rounds. And why is that? When you consider that the Julie Kedzie and Gina Carano both had the ability to fester life in their bodies for 9 months and then spawn life out of themselves, I think they're tough enough to handle those extra 2 minutes. They were completely physically capable of handling an extra 2-minute round. So the UFC has always done right by their female athletes. I can agree with that. Something that always kind of bugs me about whenever women fight is, why have ring girls parade around? Like, not that I'm saying I want to see ring anyone. I've never been a big fan of the ring girls and ring guys. It's just, you know, it's distracting. It's distracting. Here's what I don't agree with, and it's not even that big of a point. Given their service to the UFC and Invicta, I really think that Roxanne Modafferi, Bob Honchak, and Lauren Murphy should get a pass, and they should be named as one of the first contenders to the title whenever they're crowned. I get why they're included. It's essential to making the initial flyweight branding a success. I just think they've worked for more than just a chance to be on TV. Whenever the UFC was instituting this division, I think those 3 names should have just been signed to contracts right away, being like, okay, you guys are UFC fighters in this division. As soon as the champion is crowned, you guys are in line to get title shots. The way it's done, those 3 have an opportunity to be competing and shape that division right away. And I get it. You know, it makes sense, kind of. I just think that if you've earned your right, if you've paid your dues, you should just be signed. It's like whenever Tanya Ebinger was competing in that season of The Ultimate Fighter. Tanya Ebinger has done more for women's MMA than I think a lot of people give her credit for. She should have just been signed, in my opinion, and given tune-up fights. But I get it. it's just something I wanted to talk about. I mean, as soon as I saw Roxanne Modafferi's name, I was like, no, wait a minute, why isn't she just signed? And then the more I look into it, the more it makes sense. The new season of The Ultimate Fighter, Cast 26, airs later this month. Eddie Alvarez and Justin Gaethje will be coaching. A flyweight champion will be crowned at the end of the season. The UFC flyweight division for the women are being built right now, and we get to see it on live TV. It'll be airing on Fox Sports 1 and, of course, UFC Fight Pass. Next up on the Prizefight Podcast, the McGregor effect. UFC heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic calls out Anthony Joshua. Joshua was slated to fight Vladimir Klitschko in a rematch. Klitschko retired, and that rematch completely evaporated. So now, Stipe Miocic is picking his shots. Let's define the McGregor effect. It's a noun. It's using tactics employed by current UFC lightweight champion Conor McGregor, usually to get what you want or attempt to make career choices beneficial to you despite existing circumstances. Point an example, challenging a boxer to a fight whenever you are conventionally obligated to a division in mixed martial arts. Miocic tweeted to Joshua after the Klitschko retirement announcement, "It looks like your schedule is wide open. No excuses. Let's dance." Twitter has gotten more people in trouble, I think, in this decade alone than any other form of media, including our commander-in-chief. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Admittedly, the heavyweight division hasn't had a transfusion of new contenders. For the top 15 in the UFC heavyweight rankings are former heavyweight champions, including Fabrizio Verdum, Andre the Pitbull Arlovsky, Miocic himself, Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos. The number one contender, Alistair Overeem, has already fought Miocic and has been knocked out. So what we have is a stagnant heavyweight division. It's not saying that the guys who are heavyweight are bad fighters. It's just that there's been no shakeups in that division in quite a long time. The UFC light heavyweight division, with John Jones coming back, has some new excitement going on. With a new champion being crowned, the pecking order completely changes. Now, we have guys who are in line for title shots, guys who are now challengers that weren't before. The heavyweight division hasn't had that, and since Stipe Miocic won the heavyweight strap, there hasn't been any new contenders come in to challenge it within the UFC organization to kind of make it worth his while. Stipe Miocic is at the prime of his career, and it would not be wise for him to sit around and waste his youth waiting on new challengers. I mean, with the way it is, with who Miocic has beat, I mean, he could sit around and be heavyweight champion for a couple of years. Kind of like Anderson Silva did. The difference being Anderson Silva had new middleweights coming to him all the time saying, "Hey, buddy, I want your strap. I'm the man. I'm hungry. I'm coming for you." And that's what happened when Chris Weidman beat Anderson Silva. Luke Rockhold beat Chris Weidman. So on, so forth. Miocic is at the prime. He needs to be looking for challenging fights. And right now, the UFC heavyweight division does not have that. I really believe that the heavyweight division as a country is in for a big shakeup. Look up the name Alan Crowder, the pretty boy, and you'll see exactly what I'm saying. But right now, Stipe Miocic has no one who's challenging him. And what I'm about to say is, I titled the segment "The McGregor Effect." I've been very vocal that I think Conor McGregor has used hissy fit tactics to get a lot of what he wants, and there's no lie about that. I don't think that Stipe Miocic is using those same tactics. I think Stipe Miocic is seeing an opportunity, and he's trying to capitalize on it because there's no challengers. Conor McGregor has a ton of challengers at lightweight, at featherweight. There's a ton of people coming for him, even at welterweight. Stipe Miocic is in a spot where he's in a stagnant division. So yeah, okay, I get that a lot more, and I give that a lot more than what I give McGregor. His target, Anthony Joshua, a heavyweight who knocked out Vladimir Klitschko. The Klitschko era between Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko, one of the most underrated boxing legacies, I think, in the last 10 years. A couple months ago on the Prizefight Podcast, I'm asking the question, why aren't we talking about Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko like we talk about Mike Tyson or Evander Holyfield? That's how I compare them. Anthony Joshua effectively ended the Klitschko era with a knockout. Of Miocic's 17 wins, 13 have been by knockout. Of his losses, he's only been knocked out once. Those are pretty good odds. That is telling a much greater tale about a man who knows how to strike than McGregor. I have been very, very vocal that I think that Mayweather versus McGregor is a circus sideshow fight. I think if Stipe Miocic were to fight Anthony Joshua, I think it would go the same way. I don't like Miocic's odds as much as I'd like Joshua's. But I think he's more prepared for a boxing match, or even to invite Joshua into the octagon, than McGregor and Mayweather. Here's the scary side of this story. Anthony Joshua, 19-0-0 as a boxer. Of those 19 victories, all 19 have been by knockout. Anthony Joshua has yet to step in the ring and not separate someone from consciousness. Truth be told, I like the idea of Stipe Miocic versus Anthony Joshua. I think it's a better fight than McGregor versus Mayweather. In terms of ability and equality, I think that Stipe Miocic has a better shot against Anthony Joshua than Conor McGregor has against Floyd Mayweather. I think the numbers are more central. I think that Joshua and Miocic are more closely related in terms of ability than Mayweather versus McGregor. I would rather see Stipe Miocic versus Anthony Joshua. That's just how I feel. I mean, 13 knockouts out of 17 wins. You know, even the numbers. Joshua's 18 wins versus Miocic 17. And I think they both round out to be about 19 fights because Miocic has 2 losses, 1 by knockout, 1 by decision. So it's 19 fights versus 19 fights. There you go. That, I think, is the boxing versus MMA fight we need to see. I have no idea if this is going to come together. I imagine that McGregor versus Mayweather has been such a headache for Dana White that he will never, ever, ever deal with this again. But I think we owe more to Stipe Miocic in utilizing his youth and his prime than we do to Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor has plenty of challengers coming to him at MMA. Stipe Miocic has been sailing stagnant waters. We're going to close out the Prizefight Podcast with a new segment called Point Counterpoint. We're playing Devil's Advocate, Tyron Woodley versus Dana White. It's old news. I know that. It's 2 weeks old now, and we're moving on. But I wanted to play Devil's Advocate because I've had some time to think about this. And I think my perspective is unique, and that's why I wanted to bring it up now. I see the good and the bad on each side of this. I see the good and the bad from Dana White. I see the good and the bad from Tyron Woodley. Let's start with the first point. Should Dana White have to apologize for his thoughts on Tyron Woodley's fight? Absolutely not. Dana White, as the president of the company, has every right to offer his thoughts and about a fight at any time. It's his smash-mouth media presence that is part of what carried the UFC to prominence and to success. We're all expecting Dana White to drop the F-bomb. We're all expecting him to be like, oh, that fight effing sucked. Do you want to be an effing fighter? That's what we expect from Dana White. Every single time he gets behind the microphone, that is what we expect. As an employer, we're going to get to that. But do I feel like Dana White should have to apologize? No, I don't. Now let's talk about the counterpoint. Should he have checked with Tyron Woodley before he spoke to the press? Absolutely. Woodley's performance was lackluster because he was hurt and he was trying to power through an injury like a champion. A lot of face could have been saved by just checking in on Woodley before talking to the media. A text message. Tyron Woodley's in the locker room. He's getting checked out for a shoulder. I mean, there's videos of it on YouTube. Dana White would have behooved himself to send Tyron Woodley a text saying, hey, that's not what I'm used to seeing from you. Are you okay? What if Woodley had a stomach virus before the fight or dehydration, like a bad weight cut? An injury, like in the shoulder. Dana White would have looked a lot more like a caring employer if he just would have been like, hey, Tyron, are you okay? What's going on? That would have been the thing to do before going to the press and saying, oh, the hell with that guy. We're giving Bisping GSP now. We expect that from Dana White, but was it the most appropriate action? No. Point. Should Tyron Woodley have threatened to leak the UFC inside secrets if he did not get an apology from Dana White? Absolutely not. The UFC, like any employer, has the right to openly be critical of any of their contractors' performance at any time. Think about what I just said there. Contractor. Tyron Woodley is not a UFC employee. There are people who work for WNG, IMG, who are W-2 employees who get a regular salary. Tyron Woodley is not one of them. He is an independent contractor. He gets a 1099. So essentially, if you think about it is, I'm building a house, and I hire Tyron Woodley contracting to come in and put up sheetrock. Tyron Woodley is a contractor to me. I'm paying him for a job, ad hoc, one time. Do I have to worry about getting Tyron Woodley health benefits or keep doing tax deductions? No, that's on him to do. As an independent contractor, that's what it's on him to do. So that is what Tyron Woodley's relationship to the UFC is. Should he be threatening to leak anything? No, because that's insider secrets. I mean, that is trade information. I get it, he's upset. I understand that. But he's also obligated to a bit of secrecy with the UFC because they hire him in the first place. They've presented him with the opportunity to even contend for the welterweight championship. You know, ultimately, he makes himself vulnerable legally. What he's doing, if he were to say, oh, guess what? This is what Dana White does on his off time, or this is how people get paid. The UFC would have every right to roll over him with every legal opportunity they have at their disposal. Because the minute he does that, the minute he leaks what goes on in the UFC, he's leaking trade information. He's making the UFC vulnerable business-wise, and then he's making himself vulnerable legally. And if you don't think the UFC won't come at you with every legal tank they've got, boy, you are mistaken. Counterpoint. Is the UFC making a good example by openly criticizing fighters like that? No. They've essentially damaged morale, and morale is low as it is. The WMG-IMG had enough faith in the UFC to try to buy it for 4 million, and they've made a lot of missteps. Since the WMG-IMG's taken over, there's been a mobilized Fighters Association. There's been people coming up and saying this fight sucks, they're not covering my medical bills. There's a lot going on that the morale has already tanked. But now, the UFC president will go in front of the press and talk about how much you suck. And that's at a championship level. What's to give anyone who's coming into the UFC any confidence that, you know, Dana White's not going to send them to the verbal guillotine just like they did with Tyron Woodley? It sets an incredibly bad example organizationally. I mean, if you go work for McDonald's and every time you walk in, every order gets thrown on the floor by your manager, are you going to continue to work in there? No. And the UFC already has so much working against them with the Reebok deal as it is, that there is incentive to go fight for Bellator. And Bellator is going to be willing to welcome these guys with open opportunities. Even if their guarantees are lower, these guys have opportunities to make money with their sponsors. The UFC's position as the best employer MMA-wise is slowly diminishing. So I see the good, I see the bad on both sides of Tyron Woodley versus Dana White. Stipe Miocic, if he's going to box, I think now's the time for him to do it. And the UFC is building the flyweight division, using their Ultimate Fighter platform that has served them so well so far. Thank you very much for joining us for the Prizefight Podcast. Coming up this summer, there's a lot of fights happening in my region. Battle in the South is coming down at the Coastline Convention Center in Wilmington, North Carolina. Warfare MMA has Damon Blackshear fighting for a title. Next Level Fight Club returns in September. And then Lightning Strikes Kickboxing returns in December. It is a really good time to be here in the southeastern coast. Until next time, I'm your host, the big fella, Mr. Albert Miller, and fights, Cameron. Action.
Thank you for tuning in to the Cage Nation Prize Fight Podcast. All rights reserved. 2016 to 2017 Planet Aries Sports. The Prize Fight Podcast is part of the Cage Nation Broadcast Network. For more information, visit www.cagenationtv.com.